Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to my short talk looking at the changing face of laboratory accreditation. So I'm Jeff Ruddle, I'm the Operations Director at the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, or UKAS. So I have responsibility for all of our teams out there doing the assessing work, looking at the various organisations, laboratories, inspection bodies, certification bodies that we have, and their competence to do the work that they do. So I'm just going to first sort of few slides, a way of introduction to UKAS for anyone who's here, who's maybe doesn't know too much about us, wants to know a little bit more about us on here and what accreditation is. Well, accreditation is essentially a process which gives some formal recognition to an organisation or a person about their competence to carry out specific tasks. And it's done by an independent and impartial body, and in the UK that is UKAS. And the aim of that accreditation that we award to organisations is to give confidence to their clients and members of the public at large that the work that they have performed is fit for purpose and has been carried out competently. So that works kind of in a pyramid structure where UKAS accreditation, through the form of international standards, provides that assurance down into what we call conformity assessment. So the laboratories and inspection bodies that are there providing those services and products out to the market in general, where consumers, businesses are looking for confidence and trust in those services and products that they're buying, and the use of the UKAS mark by accredited organisations allows them to have that confidence and trust within there. And UKAS as a body, well, we've been around in various forms since 1966, but most recently privatised in 1995. We are outside of government as a private body, but we do have a lot of oversight from government. We're appointed by them overall, and we are made to run as a not-for-profit organisation. So government still does have some say in the way that we operate and the way that we run, but we are a private business separate from government within there. So hopefully that's, for anyone who needs a little bit of a snapshot about who UKAS is and what we are, that should provide enough. If you want more details, feel free to come and see me afterwards or pop over to our stand. So now into looking at kind of the view of accreditation and the changing face of accreditation. I think I'll start by just having a little bit of a look at some traditional views of accreditation. Probably grey men, grey women with clipboards going around with a checklist, possibly looking at what people are doing, making sure that you're following procedures properly, and being very worried about lots of tight areas of calibration and measurement and things like that. I think that's sort of perhaps been the traditional view, and definitely before I joined UKAS many years ago, might have been a view that I had as well. I think hopefully those of you that have experienced assessments from UKAS in recent years will know that's not quite true. We still, use people. The work that we do is carried out by experts in the field, people with relevant experience from the laboratories that they go out to, and can understand the pressures that the organisations are under. But it is, those traditional views are still there. When we talk about laboratory accreditation, people are probably thinking about physical laboratories, there with people performing chemical, microbiological, physical testing within there. Lots of looking at gauges, examining petri dishes, looking down microscopes, using pipettes. That's what that traditional view of what accreditation covers in the laboratory arena. And through the next few slides, I want to challenge a few things on there, because this is, yes, where accreditation has come from. Yes, it is the mainstay of what we do, but it's not the only arena that accreditation works in, and it's not the only challenges that are faced by UKAS as an accreditation body and by the organisations that we accredit. So firstly, I want to talk about something that is driving a bit of change within the sector. There's recently been a change to the main standard UKAS uses to accredit our laboratories, which is 17025. New version of that was published last year, and we're currently going through a 3-year transition of moving the laboratories across. Now actually, as is the case of a lot of standards, this revision to 17025 has really caught it up with what's happening within laboratories at the moment. And of the series of standards we use, 17025 is actually one of the last ones to have been updated into a newer format. For those of you who've not perhaps looked through it in too much detail yet, one of the major changes is it's become less prescriptive about defined roles, about documentation. Previous versions have been very clear about the documentation that you needed to have, needing to have documented procedures for everything you do, needing to have very clear defined roles and positions for all the different people within the organisation. And that perhaps supported that traditional view of accreditation about a checklist and a way you could approach it in that way. And actually, that's not necessarily, those things have a place in some areas, but it's not necessarily the way that organisations work nowadays. Responsibilities are defined more within teams, they're spread more between people. Documentation is less about the physical presence of a document that explains exactly how a procedure is used. It's more spread through things that are built into equipment, into intranets, into people's ways of working. What it's brought in is new requirements about what's called risk and opportunity, which if you talk to people who are into standards a lot, they'll say is actually a rebranding of what was termed preventive or preventative action in previous standards. It's about looking at very much more closely at the areas of your system that present risks to your business and ensuring that those risks are understood throughout the business, not just by the management, but by the people that are performing the processes within there. What are the areas of risk to the work that they're doing? Do they understand what their role is within the organisation? Does the organisation understand the purpose of the testing that it's performing, the calibration that it's performing, how it's going to be used, what its clients view as fitness for purpose, what is going to have an effect on the quality and validity of the results? So I suppose in some ways moving from sort of mindlessly following a procedure into actually having an understanding of why that procedure is taking place and where the things that you need to more tightly control than others are to reduce the risk that's in there. And the opportunities that can be there to improve what you do, the service that you provide out to your clients in there, and identifying those and working on those within the organisations. So yes, to some extent that's what preventative action was about, but this has a lot more focus now within the standard. I can't remember the exact numbers, but from the what I've been told, in the previous version of 17025, risk only got mentioned a couple of times. It's now mentioned very frequently throughout the standard as you go into there. It has a lot more emphasis on there. One of the other bits that comes through as well, accreditation has always been about ensuring the impartiality of organisations that conduct the work that's in there. It's been a mainstay of any organisation that's accredited. It must act in an impartial way. The standards now, all of the ones that come out, are asking the organisation to look at the risks to impartiality, and that is on an ongoing basis. So not just on a sort of once a year from the senior management considering what risks there might be, that actually throughout the organisation there is a view about what may affect the impartiality of the organisation, down to the technicians working at the bench as well, and them understanding things that may threaten the impartiality of the way that they're operating, as well as the impartiality of the operation as a whole. So that brings I think some changes into the way that UKAS needs to assess organisations now. We can't just look at whether someone's following a procedure and about whether a procedure is right. There are things in there that we've got to make sure are understood throughout the organisation, that this understanding of risk is there, that the understanding is throughout the organisation as well, an understanding of what impartiality means is there throughout the organisation as well, and not just with the senior management in there. So that should bring some changes that hopefully those of you going through that transition process over the next year or so will start to see coming into the assessments that we are performing. So that's one of the changes that's coming about with laboratory accreditation. I feel another one is accreditation was mainly, you go back 15, 20 years or so, accreditation was mainly a voluntary exercise. Organisations took to be accredited to demonstrate the quality of their work to their clients within there, maybe to give themselves a competitive advantage within there, to differentiate themselves from their competitors out there. But more and more we're seeing over recent years that regulators are looking to use accreditation to replace regulation, to support regulation, to mean that they don't have to go out themselves do so much inspections. They can rely upon what UKAS is doing to give them confidence in the organisations that they're using in a regulated area. That gives some great advantages to the organisations working in these areas. Firstly, they're probably not having to have a regular government inspection, and whilst we might come across quite quite sort of harsh and things, and pull up areas that are wrong. We have a different approach to regulating. We are not a regulator ourselves. We can't take away someone's permit to work, whereas a regulator can. So the interaction between ourselves and our customers, even if what we're doing is there to support regulation, is very different. But it does mean that we are now in a position where the reports, the outcomes from our assessments are being provided to regulators, and they are making decisions upon whether they can use that organisation to support their regulatory duties based upon the work that UKAS does. So it does remove an element of, there was always a strong requirement of full confidentiality between UKAS and its customers. Whilst that is still there, when a regulator sits above it, there's often a need for there to be an agreement that that regulator will get a chance to see the reports and the output, whether that's as a whole for the sector or for individual organisations. And that changes the dynamic slightly. Accreditation works when there can be a very open discussion between the organisation being assessed and the accreditation body doing the assessment. And when you move into a regulated area where there's potentially a concern about commercial impacts that can have on an organisation, that does change the face of it. And what we're trying to do is to work with regulators to make sure that they don't make knee-jerk reactions upon things that we find and things that come up. And I'll come on to that a little bit more in the slides that I do later on. One of the big things we do, for the moment anyway, is support the bodies in the UK that do work to support CE marking, the marking of regulated goods within the European Union. Obviously, with Brexit coming up, our role in that is changing somewhat, or could change somewhat, particularly in a no-deal situation. There will remain a role for product marking in the UK. That's been confirmed by government, even in a no-deal situation, where the UK will have its own role. So UKAS has got to move into how we support the UK's doing that by itself, rather than part of a wider European system as well in there. That's been something that has grown quite significantly over the last few years, where actually the European Union has said it want to use accreditation to support regulated goods, regulated products. And the UK has said, even in a no-deal situation, that it will look to do that as well. So that presents some challenges. Another area I think that comes up with some challenges in accreditation is actually what is a laboratory and what is testing. I mentioned before that traditional view of a laboratory, rows of benches, scientists working away at them in their lab coats. That's not necessarily what a laboratory is anymore. A lot of testing is moving out into the field, particularly in the area of healthcare. A lot of testing is happening at the point that care is given. In GP surgeries, in pharmacies, testing is taking place to allow them to make diagnosis, to allow them to make decide what they're going to prescribe to someone in there. So we need to look at how that can be covered. You come into areas such as environmental testing. For many years, so testing has happened in the field, and you go away from a more traditional environment in a laboratory where that scientist performing that work is supported by more senior scientists within there. They can get direct help and support if they come across unusual situations, to often a single person on their own in the field having to make some of those decisions. So you've got to look at a very different control and support mechanism that needs to be in place for the people performing that work, and we've got to assess how that is performed and make sure, without necessarily being able to see, because we can never see all of the people performing this testing, that they're competent to perform the work that they do. But also, what is testing? We're seeing AI systems come in to start making diagnosis, to analyse the data that's coming out of testing work, to make decisions, to make opinions based upon that. So how do we move from our traditional approaches of testing the competence of an individual or a group of individuals, of how they would interpret particular aspects, to looking at an algorithm and making sure that algorithm can get the same nuances out of a data set that a human can in there? And how does that work? That's a new and developing area, and something that is testing us in accreditation, and I can see why organisations want to move towards it. It potentially provides a more consistent approach. It can be a lot more efficient than a human performing that work. But is it as good? Is it particularly good at picking up the differences and the unusual things that an often a human mind can pick up and see within there? And that's something that we need to test within there if we're looking for that to be part of an accredited system. I'll come into an area that's testing us, the accreditation body, about what is a test is forensics. A lot of forensics testing is quite traditional, chemical, biological, physical testing, where you come into areas that forensics want to do, such as facial recognition, fingerprint comparison, mark comparison on things like footwear marks and stuff like that. Yes, you can make 17025 cover these things, but that's a very different area to what we're used to. And thinking about how those methods need to be validated to prove that they are giving accurate results. How does traceability, how does uncertainty fit into an area of comparison between those two activities? Definitely, I think we'd agree that something like forensic science is an area that we'd all want to have a lot of confidence in, particularly when that data is being used to underpin the criminal justice system. So we need to look at how accreditation can provide that confidence within there. So those are challenges that are coming up. So I mentioned earlier about one of the things I think this moving into the regulated sector presents a challenge to UKAS and to the bodies that we accredit. And what I feel is the biggest challenge coming up in accreditation and for our customers is the general view that there is within public, that when you stick a logo, a badge on something, it means that you're in a risk-free situation. That UKAS mark on there or another quality mark on there means that nothing is going to go wrong. Now, I'd hope that all of us as people here that are working within the scientific industry know that is not right. Any of you who've worked with the standards will know that they've all built within them how to deal with non-conforming work. The standards themselves recognise that at times things will go wrong. And actually what it is it's about the ability of the organisation to pick that up, to identify that as early as possible and put in place appropriate measures to correct that. So, mistakes will be made. Undoubtedly, no system can be completely perfect, can be 100% risk-free. We need to look at, and we get a lot of confidence actually by understanding how organisations deal with instances when things go wrong. But as accreditation with things like forensics and healthcare moves into areas that are more in the public eye, moves into areas where actually when things go wrong do have a potential detrimental impact on members of the public, it's being looked at through this lens of expecting it to be risk-free. And we've got to do a lot of education with the public, with government in general, because we get the same kind of view from particularly members of parliament and from civil servants that this organisation was accredited. How could it have made a mistake? Well, actually, I think it's more about how it deals with that mistake afterwards and how it corrects that mistake from there. If they identify it well and they deal with it appropriately, that gives a lot of confidence that organisation is improving and looking at the right things. Obviously, if they don't find their errors or they don't deal with them very well, that reduces the confidence you have in that organisation. But just by making mistakes doesn't mean that accreditation should come away. And I think that's a challenge that we've all kind of got for us, is to make sure that our clients and our wider stakeholders understand that yes, we will reduce and manage the risk as much as we can, but we cannot completely remove it from the work that we do. Okay. So I'll pass over if there's any questions. No? Everyone keen to get off for some lunch? Okay, if you do want to come pop up and see me afterwards, please do, or we're on standard H2 if you want to come and see me or one of my colleagues and talk to us about that. Thank you very much.